Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Solo ReacTalk. This afternoon, I'm going to be reacting to Legend of Kronan. Dakka Von Smashoven Flies Again, made on the Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer 40k. Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer. That's it, not 40k. Sorry, I made a mistake there. If you guys want to check out my previous reaction to the other Kronan Dakka episodes, remember that the reaction playlist card is going to be at the top right here. If you want to check out the original video as well as Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer, the links are going to be in the description below. Yes. Let us start with Legend of Kronan, Legend of Kronan, Dakka Von Smashoven Flies Again. Yes. I'm kind of mixing up Dakka and Dakka. But yes, Dakka Von Smashoven Flies Again. Let's start. 3, 2, 1, go.
Between the time when chaos broke Cadia and the return of the sons of the Emperor, there was an age undreamed of. And unto this, Kronan, wearer of the jeweled crown of Aquilonia, upon a troubled brow. It is I, his chronicler, who alone can tell thee of his saga. Let me tell you of the days of high adventure. Kronan and the Smeldar Pirate Prince, Part 2.
I've already watched Part 1, but I think it was last year, it was last year. Yeah.
The dogfight. And so it was that Kronan, the Cunning One, Lord of all of Aquilonia, burst from his room with all the gusto of our previous retelling. For, despite the deepening issues with the battle against the Smeldar, the spirit of Kronan was irrepressible. He bounced along, humming his heart out and barging tiddles as they speedily processed towards the command deck, as he did every morn. Well,
he seems happy.
Well, to say morning on a stairship is rather a misnomer, really. For, as we all know, there is no night or day when you are not on a rotating ball of mud.
True.
But using it as an indicant of the Cunning One having just had a bountifully blissful night's sleep is all important. For without a good kip, what is one truly capable of? Certainly not one's best. And it was of fundamental import that the Cunning One be at his abject pinnacle, his zenith, at this time more than any other. For things had not exactly gone to plan over the last few weeks, and all this had rather a deleterious effect on the whole Waaagh.
Yeah, the Smeldar are not like the Tau. They're not like the Tau. They are a far more difficult beast to contend with.
Now one might recall that there was much adulation and commensurate anticipation at the declaration that the Eldar ace pilot, the cast iron bast,
Cast iron bust. Okay.
who had been tearing up the flyboy wings for over a month, would indeed be facing his match. He would be taken down by the only orc in the entire Midway galaxy who could possibly hope to get a job done, that redoubtable legend of the Cunning Waaagh,
Dakka Von Smashoven,
an alumnus of the more naval Dakka Von Smashoven, the Lord of the Winds of Waaagh. Alas, this had not been the case, but it was not for a want of trying. Every day the cast iron bast would wend and weave its way through the void and attempt to pick off as many good orky flyboys as possible. Yet, whenever Dakka Von Smashoven and his elite flyboys, the Winds of Waaagh, would scramble and fly to meet the rapscallion, the cast iron would turn tail and leg it.
Coward. He would not face against the orcs, front head assault. He would rather just have hit and run tactics or guerrilla tactics and then slip away. Coward.
Not to say that there was any true need for lower limb strength, for engines were employed on his craft, not some form of weird conceptualization of the Flintstones.
Oh yeah, I remember, yeah, the Flintstones actually do move their vehicles with their feet, and they stop them with their feet as well, yeah.
Where pedal power would be a major contributor to the velocity gained. Although, truth be told, some of the odd boys had indeed attempted to make this a thing. But, as usual, much grog was involved, so it ended up being a festering pile of squig-off dung as far as plans were concerned. Not as utterly contemptible a failure as that of Mad Nut Kunkelstein's previous attempt at grot-powered engines, but hard.
Mad Nut is the psyker, right? Let me just write down his name again. Krunkelstein. Okay.
Anything that would make those involved beam when it was brought up by their contemporaries and rivals, which of course it was, both frequently and regularly. But let us push on. To be earnest or frank, the issue was gaining more of an effect than anyone would previously have believed possible. It was much akin to the entire Waaagh feeling cock-blocked, really. You know. Where two potential paramours are eyeing each other furtively, and definitely up for it, only to have one of their facially hideous and deeply celibate pals make sure to sit between them and waffle on about the most tedious, redundant, and terrifying tidbits of trivia.
Oh my gosh.
Until the moment had well and truly passed. A level of frustration that ends up in either a renowned and unique work of art, or, more usually, some form of mad rampage that punctuates in the protagonist being either incarcerated or deemed whiffy by their entire friends group or wider community. That level of frustration. For it was now pretty much clear to all involved, being the entire green-skinned population of the Waaagh, of course, that the cast iron was fit, as they say in uppish social strata. So, if the Bast would not engage, how was there to be the promised Barney? And there is nothing in the Milieu galaxy more annoying to the greenskins than a bundle denied, a punch-up put off, a colossal crumping cancelled. And nerves had now begun to fray a bit of late due to this. Now things on the macro level had actually been on the rise, for Kronan was now getting to grips with matters, and even Grandmouth Tartan seemed to be blooming in his admiralship of the greater Waaagh fleet. Not that anyone would have put it that way, of course, for it is exceptionally condescending and needlessly verbose in a feat to refer to anyone or anything with testosterone involved to be blooming. But that was beside the point. In any case, the battles of the last leg of the action had been going much better than before. But, as is so often the way when being cock-blocked, one cannot take pleasure in the fullness and cheapness of the pints provided, nor the deliciousness of the food gathered and shared, when one is zeroed in on a rare chance of getting one's leg over, as the humans would say. And so it was amongst the sheep of the Waaagh, for none truly cared for the improved results in the line ship engagements, the sinking of the enemy capital ships, nor the devastation of so many of their ports of call and hidey-holes. Not while the cast-iron Bast was still thumbing his nose at the flyboys and having his way with them every day. Oh, there was much rejoicing, as if a group of much-hated bards and players had been consumed during a winter night, but it was always subdued compared to the results gained on the day. There was no avoiding the issue. The cast-iron Bast's constant survival had been chipping away at the enjoyment of the entire event.
He has become a great irritation. So great that, the Waaagh has become disenchanted with anything else. They need to deal with this matter as soon as possible.
And this could not continue. Dakka knew it. Mad Nut knew it. Even Isaac, who was still all the way back in the Orcolonia system, knew it. And Kronan was all too aware that something had to be done, needed to be done, or this one wretch would topple the entire elan of the Waaagh. But how to get this done? Now Kronan had always considered this more Dakka Von Smashoven problem. He needed to learn and improve on the fleet level. it was Dakka who needed to work through all of this. Yet it had now snowballed to the extent that Dakka was summoned to a secret council, with not just the more naval, but others, and Kronan himself. That's serious. And so it was that he did indeed attend. But he came prepared, for Dakka had not wasted his time in between sorties, and he was well aware of the chagrin of his people. For he shared it, nay, he was the very epicenter of the storm. He felt the rage and frustration more than any other. Now, as previously stated, Dakka Von Smashoven was an orc in a billion, perhaps even more. But the point is, he was also a cunning lad. How could he have been in such close proximity to the cunning one, and not have some of it rub off all over him?
Yeah, he has to have some sort of, skill or training or understanding of how it is to become cunning in the cunning war. Because this is the cunning war. All the bosses must be cunning in some degree, some level of degree of cunningness. They must have it.
Needless to say, rubbing off was a natural effect of being around Kronan. Good job that they didn't have handles, but let us not dwell on this.
Baldermort, stop.
Phrase, as it is not as harmless in all quarters. And so it was that Dakka had himself been watching the depredations of the cast iron for quite some time now, so he was ready. Now, throughout Dakka's own deliberations, he had identified a few tiny nagging issues when dealing with the Smeldar reprobate. The cast iron was inarguably faster, almost beyond belief to state, and bordering on affront to the very guards, that a speed freak would be so outmatched. But Dakka was a realist, which is an astonishingly rare gift for a greenskin. In fact, only Chains Grond, the Orc of Mystery, was better endowed in such matters, and being an Ardad himself, Dakka would never demur from the unvarnished truth, or a varnished truth even, which you would generally consider to have had more time put into it. As many of us know, varnishing things can be a dashed tricky business. But in any case, it was another unpalatable truth that the cast iron was also better armed. His accuracy and penetration were a thing to behold. In fairness, none had seen penetration of this kind outside of a direct hit by a bank of macro Dakka cannons. The sort of depth that would make the most hardened worker of the night wince and claim that they had a dicky tummy or some other equally risible excuse to not participate in the pre-planned and paid-for event. How about experience? It did not shame Dakka Von Smashoven that he had also received a meteoric career. And in the last few weeks alone, the cast iron had clocked in no small hours of flight and fight. Now Dakka did consider taking up some of his most promising flyboys and having a few practice events. Yet this could be construed as a lack of confidence that he could trounce the perfume Ponce. A mistake to be certain. The catalogue of evidence would seem to make this a suicidal event. Now that might bother some other races, but not the greenskins. This was more like a challenge to the vast majority of them. Yet Dakka did not fear death whatsoever, but he did so enjoy his time at the side of Kronan, witnessing scraps the like he had never dreamed possible, and he wanted that to continue. Also, this rapscallion had done in for quite a lot of his mates. Revenge would taste so good. Like better than a top-shelf grog that was usually reserved only for the cunning one. That good. So how to beat the odds? How to prove the Smeldar were weedy, even in their own forte? Now, he did have some excellent ideas. Not that he would have put it that way either, as Kronan was known to have a strong and very stabby and stompy reaction to anyone who wore any form of headgear, but also to anyone infringing on his monopoly on think stuff.
Really? Come on, Kronan, you have to allow your other bosses to also think. Come on, it can't just be you alone.
Which ideas were the most dangerous, of course. for none could forget the terrible carnage of Thinkmas. Well, those who survived it anyhow. And so it was that Dakka decided to concentrate on the two things that he could affect. The first was the time and place of the scrap. Well, if he gained the compliance and endorsement from the Cunning One and Grandmaster Tartan. The other was the very nature of the battle itself, for he could be outflown, outpaced, and was at a marked deficit in the realms of accuracy. But there was one realm where he could claim absolute dominance, and this was the basis of his new approach to the scenario.
So what, like in a nebula cloud or an asteroid belt of some sort? A place that's got a lot of obstacles.
Slaying of the cast iron bast. So, Dakka welcomed the summons more than anyone in the history of formal meeting arrangement. I mean, he was all but immune to the rule of three, as he was a member of the more naval and deep in the Council of Kronan, whatever that means. Hence, he was not likely to be turned into kibble for tittles, and as he really screwed the pooch, or really sorted out by challenging or deriding the Cunning One, which was as far from his mind as is possible for such an ardent and loyal boss to his ever-victorious big boss, Kronan. Now Dakka was rather confused at the meeting itself. It went well, of course it did, for the very bedrock of cunning was the ability to absorb and utilize information, and Kronan was the champ at this particular type of thing, so he understood Dakka's proposals far deeper than anyone else, and almost instantly. It was more the fact that Kronan demanded that Madnut Krunkelstein downed a bottle of grog after every truly orky statement, and seeing as it was a meeting of Kronan, Dakka, Madnut, Tartan, Milton John, Appledon, and even Bub von Butch, there was an abundance of orkiness that could fill a volume of the Encyclopedia Britannica, or something like that. Hence, Madnut was very swiftly as pie-eyed as a student whose gate crashed an open-bar marriage or other opulent social engagement. The rivers of boff that issued from his gob were now making it look like the meeting was occurring in a particularly unattended or cleaned paddling pool. Despite this rather strange decision from the Cunning One, the proposals of Dakka Von Smashoven garnered near universal agreement. Of course, Madnut Krunkelstein's input was less than helpful, as he remained the only naysayer in the entire congregation. But Kronan did not seem to be even remotely interested in what the head weird boy boss had to contribute, so his objections and suggestions were flagrantly ignored. And so, Dakka had his green light, so to put it. And what better endorsement could a good orky orc require to know that he was indeed blessed by the very gods? Now, this was not the entirety of the event, for Kronan had something even more pressing in the offing, it seemed. And this was indeed the reason for his strange diktats to Krunkelstein. For as all now began to wade their way towards the door, Kronan bade them to follow him to their next location, which surprisingly was one of his most well-appointed dungeons. Now when I say dungeon, one should not think of the kind where some dilapidated antediluvian reptilian with immolating halitosis was ensconced on a bed of shiny bits, awaiting some plucky band of youthful gallants to defeat them and subsequently realize that friendship was the greatest thing that they gained on their journey.
Okay, I'm not sure what you're referencing there, but okay.
No, the kind of dungeon found in the dork city of Waaagh, where all sorts of vomit-inducing sadism was to be ultra-sexualized, in some way to give catharsis to the vast swathes of writers of the setting who simply can't get some. No. This was a much more workmanlike environment, where only the most pain-inducing things were held, but all the kind you would be able to describe to a grandparent in an attempt to shock them, while utterly ignoring the fact that they've probably forgotten more about unsavory practices than you will ever know in this age of puritanical prudishness, or something like that. Anyways, the room was large and well lit, so all could see exactly what was occurring. And so it was that they all ventured inside to witness a thing that many had considered an absolute certainty, and only wondered why it had taken so long to come to this point. For there was Grinner the Backstabber, chained and being slowly turned over a spit of lovely warm coals.
Why is he in a dungeon? Are you torturing him, Kronan? Because he wore a hat?
Not enough to truly cook him, but certainly enough to make it increasingly ouchy as he rotated for full all-over-body coverage. And Kronan now got Appledorn, better known to most as Nog Smasher, the new leader of Kronan's Black Legion, to explain the situation to Grinner. For the cunning one had waited long enough. He now discarded his caution and got to the point of the matter, and Appledorn explained to Grinner that he had 3 options available to him. Option 1. Grinner could tell Kronan exactly what he wanted to know about the strange hat of his.
Yeah. It's always going to be the hat. And that hat, really, it is dangerous because it contains a lot of information that helps Grinner the Backstabber. Yeah.
Option 2. Kronan would order Madnut Krunkelstein to rip the information out of Grinner's head.
Yikes.
Now this threat was punctuated by Kronan indicating the pie-faced and still vomiting Krunkelstein. For all know that mindy-windy stuff was incredibly difficult, even at the best of times. To attempt to do this while at least 9 sheets to the wind, there was less chance of Grinner getting out of this compos mentis than a squigoth controlling its posterior after being fed half a cargo container's worth of laxatives. Option 3. That Kronan would let him keep his secret and his hat.
What?
Alas, this would require Kronan to staple it to his head with the same level of diligence and effort as he had done with the stalk exchanges of the Bad Moons so many, moons ago.
I think that will kill him.
And, alas again, Kronan would then be required to make certain it never came off by severing the head of Grinner and placing it on a spear so that he could plant it wherever he was.
Oh.
As an honorific to his promise to Grinner. Now much chortling occurred while this was all going on, of course, for Bub von Butch had no love for Grinner, and nor did anyone else who originally hailed from Orcolonia.
Yeah, nobody really trusted Backstabber, because he was also a former enemy of Kronan, but he himself is not really open to the other bosses within the Moneville and, who are also working within the Waaagh. He's not really a sociable or likable orc, if I can say that. Yeah.
Knew of his base betrayal of the cunning one. So, if Grinner was considering imploring the cheap seats for support, he already knew he was off to a non-starter. And so it was that Grinner the Backstabber now divulged the strange powers of his headgear and the very secret of the magical bean of St. Hungo. Not that he knew the tale of its origin, or even the name St. Hungo the Well-Endowed, but he related as much as he could about the operation and benefits of this exceptional head accoutrement, the hat. Now truly satisfied with great avuncular jocularity, Kronan then smashed the chains of Grinner and freed him with a mere flick of his mighty wrists. Now Grinner did not immediately give thanks for the bountiful clemency of his lord, for he was a tad preoccupied with howling and jumping out of the fires he had landed in. But when he had rolled around on the ground a bit and slapped out the flames, he did indeed fall on his face in supplication to his master.
Good.
And he was even relieved to be told that he would retain the use and ownership of this hat and its potent prophetic pain. All Kronan wanted was him to share in this treasure. For the moment, at least, Grinner was well and truly out of the fire. But he would not have free rein of the fleet anymore, for Kronan would utilize his advantage in the engagements with the Smeldar. He needed something to even the odds, and this was most certainly it. Hence, Grinner was given the run of the Orcs of Omen, and informed he would now be standing in for Kit Squisher McMurder in interviewing the remaining parties, all still clearing out the innards of the vast shape. but he was never to leave, unless he was accompanied or was directly ordered to by the Cunning One. Of course, Madnut was crestfallen when he finally understood the statements made about scanning Grinner's mind, related some 10 minutes earlier, and then attempted to please his lord by enacting the process anyways. Yet, the helpful buffet of the Cunning One made him relax to the ultimate extent, as he was not clean out. Grotz, of course, were instructed to lean Madnut onto his side to make sure he did not expire on his own vomit, and then he was given all the time he needed to recover from this gargantuan drinking sesh, which was, allegedly, quite the achievement, actually. Now things were truly coming together, for the deadlock had to be broken. Well, hopefully, the exact same word could be used in the very near future about the entire Smeldar fleet. But this was
It's all up to you now, Dakka Von Smashoven.
another matter altogether, where Dakka had been considering the microcosm of his epic struggle with Adarin and Gower, the Deathbird. Kronan and Tartan had been considering the greater battle against Yane's Blonde, the pirate prince of the Smeldar Coarse Hairs. Well, more to put it, that Kronan had been considering it, and Tartan had been shouting a lot, as was his wont to do. And Kronan had identified 3 issues, as 3 was the most elegant number in his estimation, as we all know. Yet these were deeply annoying realizations, for they seemed to be wholly unresolvable, even to the Cunning One. Issue 1. Irrespective of the activities of Dakka Von Smashoven, the entire Waaagh had taken a thrashing for an extended period of time without complaint or large-scale revolt, for one reason and one reason alone. They truly believed in Kronan, and he had stated categorically that he would lead them to victory. So a crushing defeat of the Smeldar would need to be in the offing, and pretty soon to boot. For, after Kronan's recent exploration of the past escapades of his people via his treasured data slate, he knew that if a Waaagh ran out of forward momentum, well, it would fall apart like an anal mini-tantrum formation when you have dropped a squiggoth on it. And that was pretty darn fast. Needless to say, not the optimal outcome he was looking for, and certainly not something to be lauded. What would he say to the great Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka if he ever met him? No, this could not be permitted to happen. So Kronan needed to dish out a hiding to the Smeldar. Issue 2. After a mighty cogitation, he now realized that he simply did not have the time to root out and slaughter every last sheep in the Smeldar fleets. Even if he were to dish out a humongous whooping to Yane's Blonde, the simple fact was that the Smeldar were tediously adroit at running away and hiding.
You need to somehow attack a Eldar. What do they call them again? World ship? Yeah, you need to somehow get to that. That would be a very huge bounty or booty that you will achieve, and the war would be ecstatic. You need to get a world ship, an Eldar warship. Yeah.
It was vexing in the extreme to admit that any other race, let alone the pandering pansies the Smeldar, were more able than his greenskins at anything. But if he was being honest, which he always was, of course, then this was the thing he would least like his boys to be able to best their enemies in, meaning buggering off mid-scrap and, yes, hiding. Now this, of course, brought up memories of the running for cover and the gutless wonder, and Kronan did wonder how his first exploration fleet was faring. You know, the one with about a dozen rocks being led by that hapless oddie Hackbar, and one of Kronan's oldest and most able adherents, Gitsquisher McMurder. But there simply is not enough time for us to go into the activities right here and now. Of course, I shall regale thee with their tales soon, but it would muddy the waters too much today, and nobody likes muddy waters. Not really. Well, mayhap the Swamp Thing, but that is a sidebar for a totally different setting and channel, so let us push on. Issue 3. Kronan now had a burgeoning empire in his rear. Not to say that he had a fiefdom in his posterior, But he was moving further and further away from his utterly undefended supply lines and main bases, which will provide subsequent reinforcement. If he beat the poop out of the Smelter, but did not end them, well, the Pointies were known to be horrifically petulant, and some of the worst losers in the Milky Way galaxy. Hence, Kronan knew that he would be leaving his supply lines and his empire completely open to reprisals and raiding by the uppity, prancing, priggish Smelter. And this simply would not do. What if they stopped his construction in the Orcolonia system, or any other of a few dozen worlds he had conquered that were...
Oh yeah, he is constructing something, and the head of that construction project is Isaac Newton, if not mistaken. I'm just not sure what is he creating. It might be like an invasion asteroid of some sort of rock that's going to just crash land on the planet. I'm not sure. Or maybe it's going to teleport, probably. But yes, he is constructing a very big project in his home system of Aqualonia. These are very important, key points. These three key points that he has to look into. Definitely.
Amply endowed with fresh crops of boys and muggins each and every month. For the replenishment of his forces was now a concern, as he had a divinely inspired feeling that this epic scrap he was heading toward would not be over swiftly, and it would be the kind of lark that it would be positively barbaric for him to not share with as many of his people as possible. What kind of a big boss would he be if he did not cater to the needs of every generation of his greenskins, even those not yet harvested from the grounds of Orcolonia? He would be a churl and a tyrant to deny them such life-affirming action, and that again simply would not do. Hence Kronan was flabbergasted. Again, not something he would have said himself, but of all the flabbers that could have potentially occurred, this would definitely be the most ghasted. And it was definitely not like the riddle of the boxes, not one jot. And Kronan did conceive that he had been coasting a bit, really. After his revelation on how to overcome that riddle, he had almost universally applied it to near every nut he had come across. But he now needed more. More information, more cunning, and more ideas. Hence, Kronan delved again into his most cherished treasure repository, his beloved data slate. And so it was, he searched now, not for just basic information, not for other segments that could be categorized as part of what he liked to call the menu. No. He went deeper, ranged wider and further than he had ever done before. He donned his head-thinking grot, Phyllis, who was perfectly sized to not only keep his noggin warm, but also adept enough to remain still, and less required to readjust to the movement of Kronan's head. Now, this seems like a simple enough task, but of all of the thinking grots in Kronan's vast collection, Phyllis was by far the most stressed.
The fact that he has a name. Okay, let me write down his name. Phyllis, right? Thinking grot, I should say, yeah.
Sidebar. Concerning the suitable traits for a head-thinking grot. Now one might think that a head-thinking grot would be some form of leader amongst its people, a grot who could lord it over all others. But
no, not when it comes to Kronan. He is an accessory.
This is not the case. For a head-thinking grot was indeed one that Kronan would summon to place over his head while perusing his data slate. Now this was done for many reasons. The most important was simple enough, though, for Kronan wanted his hair squigs to take a break, and he now really did feel that he needed to be at peak thinkiness while absorbing the information he garnered from the data slate, but also to make certain that he was not infested with the thoughts and predilections of lesser, weedier races, as seemed to have happened before. Hence, he now used his head-thinking grot more and more. Now Phyllis had much to train in when not on Kronan's head. The first, of course, was bladder discipline. For more than a few of the supposedly sacrosanct thinking grot had become a repast for the cunning one at his first discerning of anything wet and pongy trickling down his back, or even less appropriately, his face. But poor Phyllis.
So, orcs urinate? I thought they don't have, an anatomy that allows them to urinate. So, yeah, okay. I thought they just expel the excretions from their buttocks. I didn't. I didn't know. I didn't know they had a handle. I thought they were just flat down there. Okay, so they urinate. Okay.
Was also put through its paces by the runt herds, with regular stints on an angry and particularly bitey squig. This was, of course, so that Phyllis retained its composure and placement on the bonds of the brilliant one when he moved about the place. For even when sat and contemplating, Kronan was as active as any orc, and constantly leaning forward or back, belly laughing or looking at the ceiling in consternation, in a way that mimicked a perpetual motion device based on the motions of a toddler on amphetamine sulfate.
What?
Thus, Phyllis was a grot trained to an inch of its life, for it had much responsibility. If Kronan was to decide that he did not like the new way of doing things, well, if he was peed on once too often, or Phyllis fell off his head in the midst of a particularly tricky and important cogitation, well,
he's going to be eaten, isn't he?
His present attitude to the grot could well alter and revert to his previous predilections, meaning massed burnings and firings of grots into space or walls, or the space between walls. And none of the grots really wanted to return to the old regime, despite it being the most natural of orders for the orcoids. Only Kronan's high opinion of the usefulness of the grot prevented mass orogrotmy displays, and all the grots knew it. Hence, Phyllis was under intense and immense pressure, not only from the runt herds, but from its peers as well.
It's all on you, Phyllis. No pressure.
Poor bugger. Sidebar over. And so it was that Kronan, suitably attired with Phyllis, delved deep. And what he found was a load of absolute tosh. Well, for the most part. As stated previously, Kronan had an exceptionally low view of the vast majority of the so-called information inside the data slate. The humans seemed to be totally consumed with collecting and collating utter drivel. Yet, even they could sometimes be counted on to have noted something of actual genuine use. And so it was that Kronan discovered two particularly interesting tracts. One was titled The Art of Waaagh. The other, a seemingly updated version of the same concept, purported to be written by the gaudy emperor himself. And Kronan did actually lose some of the fleeting respect he had for that horrific peeping Tom, as he had named this odd book the Primpimpia Belly Toaster. Now Kronan was buggered if he could take it seriously with a moniker like that, but he mused that perhaps this was a most important lesson, to see beyond the obvious, in this case the preposterously silly name, to get the truth behind it. And Kronan read this at length. Now he had to admit that most of it was utter tosh, and far more of a manual describing how to actually motivate humies to do what the orcs did naturally, to fight. And in no small way did Kronan feel some pity and revulsion at the lengths required to motivate the humie boys. I mean, one segment admitted that they needed to have a river or lake behind them, so as to dissuade humie warriors from buggering off before the battle had even begun.
A what? A river or lake? Okay.
Kronan scratched his head in consternation. Well, more to put it, he scratched Phyllis, but the effect was the same. Yet, in amongst the droning tedium of sheaves of wheat and the oft-deployed mention of non-combatants, whatever they were, there were indeed some interesting ideas he could absorb into his overall battle strategies. Okay, the vast majority of it seemed far more about avoiding or limiting losses, which was deeply confusing to the cunning one. But some insights really could do with being tested out. And what better time than now, in his confrontation with the Smeldar scum. They had proven to be a much more worthy adversary than he would ever have hoped. But it was now clear that he needed to take this so much more seriously than any land campaign. For if it were on a planet or base, then, as a last resort, he could just simply jump into the lines and work his way towards the enemy leader and cut his smegging head off. And this realization was what Kronan had been waiting for, searching for. This moment, this information, this change in perspective. Why not? Why could he not change the very nature of the battle so that it more matched his natural wishes and strengths? But how? How could he do this? And in his mind's eye, he saw the pieces all coming together, which led him on to the lightning bolt, the most potent thought he had ever had, now zapping his brain and coursing through his every sinew. How to resolve not just a conundrum, but how to eradicate all three of his issues at the...
Let's hear the answer to your problems, Kronan.
One stroke. Yes. This was a stroke of pure, undiluted genius. Now, all he needed was a little energy and a lot of luck. Yes, he did. And so it was that the cast-iron bast started his rampage of the day. Yet, this was not a day like any other, for the orcs had prepared a wee welcoming committee. Not for the cast-iron bast, of course, for he was wholly and totally owned by Dakka Von Smashoven, and it was truly hilarious. Adarin Angau, the Deathbird, flew into the fray as he did each day. Yet this time, there was no fighter screen defending the fleet, and it was like a red flag to a bull, whatever that was. Hence, the Deathbird decided to punish the capital ships for not giving him more appropriate snacks to snack on. The cast-iron bast, the Deathbird, flew into one of the flanking formations and caused absolute carnage. Well, for a one-man Smeldar fighter at any rate. He twisted and twirled like a hardy pin in the air, diving down to avoid banks of docker fire, tearing into the bridge of one kill cruiser, burning the face off a few of the sheeps as they tried to close ranks to overlay their firing solutions and create entire banks of fire. Alas, the cast iron was too swift, too skillful to be taken out so easily. Yet, with every blast and every dodge, the orcs on the defending sheeps still grinned, for they knew the plan. And they knew that the cast iron was actually being played, stitched up like a kipper. For as he pranced and lanced, darting and diving, something else was going on entirely. And, as with so many other days, the cast-iron bast took note of the new player in the skies, and turned tail and fled. For today there was no huge bank of the winds of Waaagh flying at him. No, there was the one single solitary fighter powering toward him.
Dakka Von Smashoven.
It was, of course, Dakka Von Smashoven. And the words of his seer screamed into the memory of the Deathbird, the cast-iron bast. Fight not the green lord of the winds, duel not with the Hoven. The one who comes at you alone shall be your undoing. He will hunt you down like a wounded Gyrinx. He will not be as Falshu, but as the bloody-handed god. Whatever that means. The prophecy was coming true before his very eyes. But how? This one fighter was a mere orc. The cast-iron or Deathbird, whatever you prefer, really.
That's your problem. You think it's just a mere orc. This is an orc of the cunning Waaagh. This is an orc belonging to the Mourneville of Kronan the Cunning, the war boss of the cunning war.
Turned tail and pegged it. And in the cockpit of his heavily adjusted fighter, Dakka Von Smashoven lit up a stogie. He leaned back and put his feet on the steering thingy and snacked on a snot. The cast iron banked away and dipped behind the shadow of a moon, the one he had come from only 2 hours before. And as he was cut from the starlight and looked at his screens, his wee Smeldar face dropped like a lead rhinoceros. His eyes widened until they were like saucers. Not huge ones, I mean more like toy ones really. But either way, like saucers. As Dakka chuckled, for he knew exactly what the Smeldar saw. And this would be 24 kill cruisers with accompanying fighter wings, all of them floating about with any lights on their ships turning on and off in succession. This permitted the cast iron to not only know the true joy of the Orky party that was going on aboard each ship, but also it nicely illuminated the floating scrap that was a cast iron bast's base ship previously. Of course, the cast iron swept away to a distant comet. Again, Dakka just nonchalantly used his left boot to alter his trajectory as he trailed after the bast at a healthy distance. The cast iron zoomed forward, but soon banked away again as he flew over the comet, and there was another set of 10 kill cruisers, and smaller support ships of course, all doing pretty much exactly what he had seen only a short while before. They were circling around like sharks waiting at a catch, as the cast iron once again saw his support ship in absolute bits. For the Greenskins had located this rapscallion support ship days prior, but they had waited. And they had made sure that they could get to the enemy unnoticed by the system in general. Now to say that this precision short jump through the burp to get the drop on the Smeldar had been without cost would be a terrible lie. For in truth, over 24 Orky ships had been lost in the moon's surface and the comet's trail as burning squished wrecks. But heck, who said anything as fun as Waaagh would be without its cost?
Yeah, definitely.
And it was a tithe the Greenskins would pay gladly. His base ship gone, the cast iron was now a stranger in a strange land indeed. For everywhere he turned, flotillas of Orky ships lurked, laughing as hard as they could of course, but he was not to know that. Perhaps knowing he was creating such hilarity might have brightened his day and made it all worthwhile. Although this is incredibly unlikely, for the Smeldar were total killjoys, all knew. But all of this aside, the cast iron, the Deathbird, Adarin Angawa encompassed his doom. He could not believe it, was aghast at the reality of his situation. Not flabbered, but definitely aghast.
Now you must turn around and face Dakka Von Smashoven. You must face him.
Anywho, he knew that he could not escape, and that lone fighter was coming after him, hunting him like an amble through the tunnels of the night sky. So, resigned to this battle in the face of destiny, the cast iron turned around and gave it some way. If he was to go out, it would be in a blaze of glory. Or so he thought. But he did not really understand the situation until he got within Dakka range.
There's more?
For Dakka Von Smashoven was not flying a usual fighter. No. He noted the cast iron was coming in, taking his boots down, flicking away his stogie, and dopping what was left of the snot. He grabbed the sticks of the craft and leaned in. Smashoven was going to enjoy this. He opened up the comms and bellowed his one-word instruction. Fire! For what he flew was indeed an ultimately altered and augmented Wasborn blaster jet, and the very first of its kind in the Waaagh. Smashoven called it his flying fortress.
Ooh.
For it was ludicrously large, having entire cadres of grots sitting in seats aiming its plethora of weapons in near every direction. And by Mork's cunning cranium did they enjoy their job. The fire coming from it was truly astonishing, and overlapping fields of fire crisscrossed nearly every angle and elevation in every quarter. The cast iron noted the wars of firepower and turned tail to bugger off. Yet
there's no escape. You must face Von Smashoven. There's no escape.
This instinctive action would be moot, for he had nowhere to run to.
Exactly.
Baby, nowhere to hide. And with the resolve of his warlike people, the cast iron turned back with a daring maneuver of his own. he would play chicken, whatever that was, with this huge, nasty, ugly, orky fighter. He ploughed through the void towards Dakka Von Smashoven and poured fire of his own into it. Bright lance fire slammed into the flying fortress and scorched its flanks, punched neat and wide holes through its wings, yet nothing seemed to stop it. The entire Waaagh gasped as the Smeldar pilot placed a perfect shot directly into the cockpit of Dakka Von Smashoven. Yet, to the elation of all, and the surprise of all but one, Dakka seemed to survive. How?
Because he's not in the cockpit. He's in some other location in the ship.
Top of the cockpit was mostly destroyed, and he was open to the void, of course. Yet he just grabbed his helmet and donned it. And, astonishingly, he was not burned with crispy mushroom-flavoured wisps of smoke. And both Dakka and Kronan grinned at exactly the same time. Did the Smeldar really think he could take Kronan's best flyboy from him without so much as a fight? For Dakka had been loaned that most secret of all of Kronan's defences, his backup shield generator.
It's in your buttocks, just like Kronan. Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, it's the best place to put a shield generator. Definitely, it's the best place.
But we shall not discuss how it was given, nor where Kronan told him was most cunning for it to be held.
I know where.
Well, we know, but let's not dwell on it. In any case, the momentary elation of the Smeldar for his prodigiously skilled and accurate strike made him lose concentration for a mere second, and this was enough. As Dakka Von Smashoven ducked the fortress down to the exact level and course of his enemy, and the cast-iron bast's eyes widened for a second time in the same hour, for his intent was to fly along the hull of the base of the fortress and take out as many of the gunnery spheres with their little grots in them, then fly away and continue to dissect the thing in front of its fleet. The last act he could do before he would be swarmed by orky fighters. Yet the poor sod had banked on the pilot being crispy fried and thus unable to pilot his craft. When the fortress ducked down and fired into him, the Dakka ripped the wings clean off of the Smeldar fighter, both of them. The last thing the cast-iron bar saw was the grinning mug of Dakka Von Smashoven as he gave the ancient salute of the pilot. In more common parlance, he flipped the Smeldar the bird. Then Smashoven pressed down on his big red button, and about 70 missiles erupted from the bomber. It was like watching a hedgehog being shot with bazookas. The poor sod was blown to such tiny fragments that it looked like a merchant banker's nuptials, as he had been transubstantiated into confetti.
I'm sure the Waaagh celebrated. They were ecstatic.
The cast-iron bast, the Adarin Angao, the Deathbird, was destroyed. And the screams of adulation that went up across the entire Waaagh were akin to the last scene of The Return of the Jedi. You know, the good one, with Yub.
Oh my gosh. I can imagine. Oh, I know.
Nub in the background, not the later one, with the panning shots from across the Empire cobblers.
Oh, that one was also good, though. Oh, okay.
The cunning Waaagh was elated. And so too, of course, was its lord. For Dakka Von Smashoven had not just done it the orky way, by strapping so much firepower onto his bomber that he could probably dig his way through a planetoid. No, it had been done the cunning way. And that, thought Kronan, was how it should be. For it was a sacrament unto Mork, and that is why it had worked. Now Dakka Von Smashoven was getting a tad nippy in his new open-topped bomber, so he brought it back to the ranch, as they say. And there he was lauded by all, and even Kronan, who was usually a bit put out by anyone else getting wholesome praise. Just this time, he was as encouraging as any other. The day had been won, and the Smeldar had been put back in their place. And this was no small thing, for it was all part of Kronan's stroke of genius. Now, not a stroke like being suddenly unwell and your face melting a bit, or the kind where one is in the shower for a bit too long. No, This stroke was a divinely inspired accumulation of all of his knowledge and his cunning. For now, he was to initiate his biggest plan of all time. Its complexity so dazzling it would have blinded a star. Kronan was about to end the campaign with a smelter in one final decisive action, and he could barely contain his enthusiasm.
I'm sure he's going to target a world ship. Yeah, I'm sure of it.
Tomorrow was going to be a good day indeed, or he would be slain like a bug on the windscreen of a Bugatti Veyron. But what is life without a bit of risk to match the rewards? Boring, that's what. Tonight, the entire Waaagh drank grog in the name of Dakka Von Smashoven. Tomorrow would be the end of it all, or the beginning of the strangest and most cunning campaign ever waged by greenskins since the ancient Waaagh in Devon. Or something like that. To be continued.
Alright, guys, that's it. That's it with Legend of Kronan. Dakka Von Smashoven Flies Again. Part 2, The Dogfight. Made on the Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel. Yeah, I wonder what is this plan that Kronan has developed with with Phyllis on his head. I wonder what is this grand master plan. Yeah, I can't wait to hear about it. But well done to Dakka Von Smashoven for finally defeating this very irritable elder who has just been coming in and going out of battles with the war fleet, with the cunning war fleet. And yeah, cast iron bust has been defeated. I know where Von Smashoven put his personal shield. I know. I know where he put it, and that was very effective of him. Very, very cunning of him, and well done. Well done to him, and well done to the entire war fleet. The sacrifices that were necessary to make sure that cast iron would not be able to retreat effectively also benefited the efforts of Dakka Von Smashoven, and it all came down to a very successful, brutal end to his enemy. And yeah, well done, Dakka, well done. Keep it up. Keep thinking like your war boss, like your big boss, Kronan. Keep thinking like him. Think outside the box, improve where you need to improve, and I'm sure you will stay in the Monovel as one of the leading lights and generals of the Cunning War, definitely. Who was it? Backstabber. He's lucky. He could have died. He could have died with his memories being extracted from his mind by Mad Hatter. Or Mad Nut, sorry, not Mad Hatter, Mad Nut, or he would have been decapitated, and his head would have the hat stapled on it. So yeah, he's very lucky that he just decided, you know what, no, this is too much for me. Let me just tell the truth. Let me just talk to the war boss. And Kronan just wanted to understand, where is he getting this knowledge? Where is he getting the advice on what to do, especially when he was dealing with the Tyranids on board the Ox of Omen. So yeah, it's good that Backstabber just gave up all the information, and Kronan has decided to let him go as well. So he's lucky, and hopefully he understands now that anything that you find that is valuable, like a hat, you gotta inform the war boss. You have to inform him. If you don't, you're gonna be in another torture cell where you'll be tortured until the war boss decides he'll give you 3 or 4 ultimatums, and you choose which one do you want. So yeah, hopefully Backstabber will learn from this experience and he won't do this again. You have to be open and frank with your war boss, so that he can fully understand how can he utilize you properly on the battlefield. So yeah, job well done to everybody in the fleet, and also Kronan, I wonder what is this Grandmaster plan of yours? I can't wait to hear about it. And how is it going to deal with all 3 problems that you have identified? Yeah. Alright guys, that's it. Remember, if you want to check out the original video as well as the Baldermort's Guide to Warhammer YouTube channel, the links are going to be in the description below. If you like my reaction, give it a like, comment and subscribe to my channel. Click on the notification bell if you want to be up to date with my latest videos. And I'll see you guys hopefully next week. Okay? Bye-bye.